Digital transformations and ERP implementations are notorious for failure, for taking too much time, too much money. And in fact, 80% of organizations that go through digital transformations report that they have some sort of failure. And that's according to Boston Consulting Group, McKinsey, and other research firms that have shown that 80% or more of projects fail. And the question is, why does that happen? Why do so many organizations spend too much time and money and heartache and chaos on their digital transformations? That's what we're going to talk about here today. And more importantly, we're going to talk about how you can save time and money significantly on your project by making some small adjustments, but very important adjustments to your strategy. My name is 𝘪𝗓𝗏. I'm the CEO of 𝘆ście Consulting. We're an independent and tech agnostic consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. Thank you for being here today. We're streaming to YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and X, as well as Twitch. So be sure to drop in the chat any questions you have along the way. We'll be getting to those questions. Love to hear from you here, any questions you have around the topic at hand today. It's actually a very broad conversation we're going to have today, but the whole theme gets back to what are the things we can be doing to save time and money on our implementations, make sure that things don't get away from us, and make sure that we retain control of the project and put the right guardrails in place and really catch those issues before they become money pits that can't be recovered from. So that's really the whole theme of what we'll cover here today. Before I introduce our guest here, just real quickly, if you don't mind dropping in the chat, what city and country are you joining from today? I always love to hear where everyone in the world is joining from. My guest and I are both joining from Denver, Colorado in the US today, but love to hear in the chat where you're joining from today. And as a follow-up question, in addition to letting us know what city and country you're joining from, just drop in the chat, if you don't mind, why you think the number one reason is projects take too much time and money. Projects like these, when we talk about digital transformations, ERP implementations, any sort of enterprise technology change initiative, why do they take so much time and money? I'd love to hear just sort of your knee-jerk reaction to that. And of course, that's the million-dollar question we'll unpack here in more detail throughout the conversation. So I'd love to hear your thoughts in the chat there. So joining me to have this conversation to talk about how to save time and money, how to slash time and money from your budget and your timeline while also making the project more effective. Joining me to have the conversation is Khalid Morris from 𝘆ście Consulting. So Khalid, thanks for being here again today.
Thanks for having me.
Just had you on a few weeks ago. It feels like yesterday, but it's been almost 6 weeks or so since you were last on the show. And last time you were here, we talked a lot about AI and how AI can be used as part of an overall digital strategy. And we will touch on AI today. In fact, that is one of the keys or one of the things that can help with streamlining a project and making it more cost effective and more optimized in general. But before we dive into some of the things we're going to talk about here today, not limited to AI, but other stuff, tell us a little bit about your role and how it pertains to AI and consulting in general.
Well, I'm at 𝘆ście. I'm the director of AI and data strategy. So I deal with it a lot. I think it's transforming a lot of what we do on the consultative side. That's both working with vendors. That's both an approach. That's kind of across the board. So I'm excited to work internally to kind of revise a lot of our practices and how we work and use AI internally with some of our intellectual properties, as well as working with clients to sort of build out what their AI models look like for their organizations.
Great. So I'll ask you just to start the conversation, just to sort of open up the conversation around this whole thread of implementations taking too much time and money. What are some of your knee-jerk reactions to the question I just asked the audience around what they think the real causes of delays and budget overruns are? I mean, if you had to summarize it, in 30 seconds or so, I know that's difficult to do because there's so many different variables that we'll cover here today. But what's your sort of overview or headline summary of why that is?
Labor, human labor. It's extremely hard to estimate work. I've kind of been on the dark side of this on the development end. And it was one thing I absolutely hated was, when are you going to be done? That question. You can project it and kind of say that it's going to take you, 2 weeks or 3 weeks to develop a particular build object, and maybe it takes longer. Maybe there was a problem there that you just didn't forecast or see, and instead of 2 weeks, it takes 3 weeks, or instead of 3 weeks, it takes 4. And it just creates this domino effect. So it's really hard. It's really hard to predict some of the problems that you're going to see on projects. It's hard to plan for it. And so these are sensitive variables, and that you're kind of planning. Like we always talk about, oh, it's going to take a year, or it's going to take 18 months. But for a given implementation project. And the reality is, you a lot of times don't know until you kind of get into the middle of it, and you're trying to manage to a timeline. And that always is just a difficult exercise for all of those involved, whether you're throwing more people at it, or you're resource constrained, or whatever the variables are on the client side. It just creates a lot of pressure.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a big theme we'll touch on here today is this dynamic of projects like these, where so many things, like you just said, happen during the implementation, during the most expensive part of the implementation, when you've got the small army of tech consultants that are designing, building, deploying software, and the meter is running every hour, every day, every week that you delay whatever it is. It's not just that one decision or that one activity that's slowing down. It's the entire project. I mean, there's so many things on a critical path. The meter doesn't stop running just because, you've got one glitch in the project, and you're trying to address one problem that's slowing down the entire thing. The problem is you end up paying, the meter keeps running that entire time.
Yeah.
And so one way that we can think about this is, how can you move that pain, that messiness, the human dynamics and all the other issues that go along with it? How can we move that up front before the meter really starts running? Like, how can we work through that stuff and get as much of that out on the table, so that we have not all the answers, but we have at least most of the big rock types of answers defined for ourselves, so that by the time the small army of technical consultants are on site billing you by the hour, we can be as efficient as possible with those resources. And too often companies don't realize that by us slowing down in our decision making or responsibilities we have on the project, it's not like the consultants just stop billing and say, oh, hold on, Khalid's still making up his mind. Hold on, time out, let's stop billing. Right. They keep billing. I mean, they're billing you whether you're ready or not. And I think that's one of the most common dynamics we see.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, and there's a lot more to that, of course, that we'll get to. But I want to just real quickly turn to the audience. Thanks for those that have chimed in, where you're joining from. Adrian on LinkedIn is joining from Montreal, Canada. Thank you for joining today. Darian on LinkedIn that says good morning. Thank you for joining. And then Alcinda on LinkedIn says, afternoon, everyone from Johannesburg, South Africa. One key reason digital transformation projects take time and are costly is the lack of buy-in from the business, which delays execution and implementation. Yeah. So again, it's not like you can. I don't want to suggest that it's easy if you just get all the buy-in and the buy-in from the business up front. But if you can start that process as early as possible, that's going to eliminate a lot of the resistance and headwinds you get later on in the project. So that's an important point here. Here's a question we can get to in just a moment. In fact, maybe we just dive right into it. This is from Carmen on LinkedIn. Carmen says, very interesting point of view. I'm curious to know your thoughts on agentic AI. And do you think that we'll see automation tools like process mining and AI working together to understand decisions and processes? So maybe let me just open that up a little bit and say, how we'll dive into one of the first threads here around AI. How are we seeing AI improve and streamline implementations to make them more effective? And here we're talking about the implementation itself, not necessarily the end use of AI at the end of the day, which is a whole nother conversation that you and I have had before. But this is more about how can we use AI during implementation to kind of take control of the project and make it more efficient and more effective longer term.
Across the board, across the development life cycle, certainly in different ways. If you're thinking about it in a process format, the way that question was suggested, a big thing that jumps to my mind is data cleansing, and how that is totally different now. It's different with respect to the platforms and how we would migrate and kind of get there, certainly in a lot of the work that we're doing with clients and really asking them, pushing them to think a little forward about their data models and how they could leverage more out of their data models with AI. If you move that into the implementation space, a big thing that used to be a huge thing. I mean, I've done a lot of data cleansing exercises. We've seen, I don't know how many projects that have been delayed or pushed because the data wasn't where it needed to be in the format and structure that needs to be. It usually takes some time, especially with complicated data models. You throw a couple AI agents in there, and all of a sudden, something as complex as data cleansing becomes simple. We used to have to do programs, SQL programs, to sort of routines that we would build in to make sure some models are cleaned. We would have even a little more manual exercise. There's a lot of companies out there that you can pay a lot of money to per record to just make sure that that it's clean. Now we kind of have the capability of kind of creating kind of this automation, for it. And even some of these tools, certainly ones that we're working with, they're just accepting data in raw form, and they're not even asking you to clean it, saying, "Oh, don't worry about it. It'll be clean kind of once we get there." Why? Because of a lot of these agents. So that's the top of mind thing that kind of jumps to mind, of something that was really complicated, causing a ton of delays, and now it's sort of not that big of a deal.
Yeah. Yeah. And in addition to data cleansing and migration too, which you're right, that's such a super labor intensive process historically that now AI can help with. It doesn't, solve all the problems, all the
Right.
world's problems, but
Right.
it does help for sure.
Right.
But I want to talk a little bit about the tool we use at third stage. We have something we call Mission Control AI, which is really an AI tool that we use from start to finish, from the early strategy and requirements definition phase of a project through the actual implementation itself, the design, the build, the test, all that stuff. So that Mission Control AI tool is meant to do two things. One is to automate what used to be a very labor intensive, expensive process, because you were paying expensive consultants to do a lot of that labor intensive work. But also it's capturing things using technology that humans oftentimes will miss. And it's serving as sort of a repository. In addition to the intelligence of AI, it's also serving as somewhat of a repository for every workshop we have with the client, any type of requirements definition or any types of information we gather from the client along the way. Talk to us a little bit about this Mission Control AI tool, and kind of how are you seeing it, and how are our team seeing it streamline our own processes?
There's a lot of meetings that happen on an implementation project. I mean, you have weekly cadence with core team, sure, but then you have all of these satellite meetings that are occurring at the SME, and these are the important ones. Just information that's captured there from a consulting perspective, as well as from a client perspective. And you physically cannot attend every single meeting on a implementation, and that's even a small. And a large one, you can just kind of forget about it. And that's why these project meetings become important, because that's really where you start to bring everything that happened across the different departments and across the different meetings. You sort of start to collaborate to sort of create, okay, how are we going to troubleshoot? Where are there areas of problems in this particular implementation, or where we kind of running into headwind? Well, with tools like what we're using kind of here, is we can put all of our information in a project repository. Now it's so much easier to query, so much easier to kind of really track not just all of the intricacies that's happening into these particular meetings, but we can start to relate broader things that we hold dear and have held dear for some time, with things like requirements, or why a given project is of value to an organization from a business, from a benefits perspective, right? The core reasons why you decided to do an implementation in the first place. Can you imagine flagging those things to kind of be able to say, kind of, when you have a conflict against this core theme, right? It might have been a revenue driver, or a key piece of function that really made the executive team, really made the organization say, no, we really need to move in this direction beyond just our systems are old, but key functions. Like, can you imagine flagging that in an implementation and say, is anything that comes against this, anything that runs contrary to this particular benefit, we want to know. Like, we want to raise that as a red flag. And you're not in the meetings all the time where this is happening. And so it is a chore to naturally track all of these variables that go into an implementation strategically, all these strategic variables that are happening in an implementation. And so with kind of the tools that we have and what we're kind of building in are just smart, efficient ways for us to kind of really create a repository of sort that allows us to just make sure that we're constantly pushing towards the best version of ourselves from a systems perspective. And it's definitely, it's not something that we could have imagined a while back, but it's just kind of one of those elements that are available for us now that we can really use to really drive a better outcome for our clients and what their long-term systems experience will be.
Yeah, and it's, an example, or just to give a couple examples of how, in addition to capturing information that either you're not in every meeting, or even if you are in every meeting, I mean, how many times have you or I try to document through our notes everything here? You just aren't going to catch everything. I mean, you can't think fast enough and type fast enough to capture everything. Whereas when you have an AI agent sitting in on a meeting and capturing every word that's spoken, now all of a sudden you're capturing all the nuances, every little detail that may not seem important at the time, or maybe it's not important enough to capture in it, all your detailed notes. But now suddenly AI is capturing everything to where you can go back later and say, give me the, the 20 biggest business benefits in the production planning function. And it can spit out based on everything it's learned, throughout the project. It can spit that out. Plus, the other cool thing about it is it learns from other clients that we work with. So similar industries or similar types of companies, it can suggest other types of benefits based on that over time as we continue to train it. But I think that's, you think about the time it takes to create a business case, and now all of a sudden it can give you at least a starting point based on all the information it has, or a change impact assessment for change management, or, define what the biggest process improvements are going to be. When it comes time for testing, create a test script. There's so many different things that we could do that are downstream outputs from an upstream activity that AI now is capturing and collating and working with. So that right there, I mean, that's not only speeding things up, but it's also capturing more detail and more nuances that oftentimes humans are going to miss.
Yeah, like to the transcript level. In our case, just kind of going back to, like, where are we getting this from? And being able to put our finger on, in this meeting, this happened, right? So we can always have context right in the event that, maybe that wasn't the capture that we sort of needed. We can kind of go back and quality check kind of where we're getting certain things from. So it's a very, very valuable tool across all the elements that you're suggesting, in including management of a given project. It just keeps us honest on the consulting side, less guesswork. The information is all available there. There's really no need to do a lot of guessing. And so, no, I'm excited about the way we're going to use this, the way we are using this, and kind of how that's morphing into the future there. So, no, it's all the things that you're suggesting.
Yeah. Here's a couple comments from the audience here. Amar on LinkedIn says, in my opinion, the main reason, and this is a response to the question, by the way, of why do you think, I asked the audience, why do you think projects get delayed and cost more than expected? Amar says, in my opinion, the main reason is that implementers are often full of hype and fancy ideas, while enterprises are constrained by the harsh realities of their day-to-day operations. And I think that's a really good point. That I think it's really easy for an outside implementer to come in and say, hey, we can deploy your technology in, like you said, 12 months. And they probably can, but you as a business probably aren't going to be able to consume those changes and change your business fast enough to meet that 12 months timeline. So
there's a dramatic difference between sales and execution. So, in the sales cycle, yeah, I guess we can term that hype and fancy ideas. They are selling you. They're telling you the best qualities of themselves. It's not even a lie, really. They're singing their own praises, saying that I'm good at the following. But to your point, yeah, just because you're good at that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be an ideal fit for us, at least even in function, right? It might be hard to implement for a host of reasons at a given organization. And when you're not sensitive to that, it can come back and bite you. And that's kind of one of those things where you have a strategic value point of, we are buying this system for us to have the following functionality. People buy on a few core reasons. And I think those reasons are important. You're spending millions of dollars on those small reasons. Let's say there's 10 of them. It's not going to be 100. Let's say it's really 10 core reasons or 5 core reasons of why this software is the best thing for us to go ahead and do in comparison to everything else. Those things should be tracked. And I think that in the middle of those implemented, you kind of get further down the line. It's so easy in a normal implementation to just get lost and forget about those, or to come in conflict with, well, we didn't foresee that we weren't going to be able to implement this core function because the way your organization works, or maybe the politics, maybe there's a lot of resistance or headwind. There's just a bunch of reasons why that could be static or could be problematic. And when that happens, I think it puts the value case in jeopardy. It's like, we spent millions to do this. Why would we want to jeopardize that? And we don't always have those voices or those moments in implementation projects where we can flag those things and say, guys, this is a core tenet. This is
right.
one of the reasons why we bought this in the first place. I get that you may not want to do it, or there may be some resistance there, but because this is a core tenet, it's very important that we do this, and we do this the right way, and keep everyone honest on the project as to why this is an important feature.
Yeah. And it kind of relates to a comment from Kamal on LinkedIn. Says, not to forget the log, the history, things get forgotten. And,
Easy.
you look at a 12, 18, 24, 36 month project, stuff
Very
changes.
easy.
Yeah.
Very, 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 and not only is it easy to not only is it easy to forget some of those core things change. If you can imagine an acquisition model, a business that is ending up buying other companies, you can get an acquisition in the middle of an implementation can really put things in a weird space. Because if it's a large acquisition, or even if it's a small, it may kind of change some dynamics, priorities, puts a lot of pressure on a lot of resources. It really can put a strain on a given project, and it can change the dynamics of why we decided to do this in the first place. We didn't know we were going to buy this company 6 months or a year into the implementation. So things get forgotten, yes, but things also change for the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And people just forget stuff too. They forgot that, oh yeah, we did talk about that. Or, oh yeah, we had that stakeholder in that one meeting, and they pointed out this nuance in our process that none of the rest of us fully understand. And you don't want to forget that stuff.
Yeah, and with our tools now, we can point to the conversation. Say, no,
Yeah.
you said it in this conversation, kind of at this point. And that's not to track or put your finger in a negative way on things, but again, it's to keep track of those core elements that are really driving the reasons why we want to do this one way or the other. So I absolutely get forgotten. I think it's human nature to, in a chaotic environment, to not remember the full detail of why you thought what you were thinking, or why we decided to go in one direction or the other. So it's very natural to have a challenge with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Carmen on LinkedIn says, yes, data is so important. I think of data as the blood flow in the body. Thank you. Great feedback on this.
It is.
It is.
Especially for AI.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, especially with AI. 𝘆cie_'𝗋𝗋 on YouTube says nice. So thank you for the for the comment there. And then this is an interesting comment from Adrian that I want to open up to another question here. But Adrian on LinkedIn says, I think most people think ERP is an IT project. Reason I want to hone in on this for a second is because this sort of gets back to another issue that happens or leads to delays in projects, which is you get a proposal from a software vendor and they give you that 12 or 18-month timeline to implementing technology. And then one of the fatal flaws or mistakes that companies often make is they take that plan at face value, which is an IT project. I mean, what they're proposing is an IT project, which is deploying technology. It's not transforming your business, changing your people, changing your processes. It's putting new technology in place. So it gets into this whole, let's call it a combination of PMO and phase zero up front. You've got to define what the real full plan is going to be, not just the technical plan, but all the other stuff that needs to happen. And all that other stuff is not typically being proposed by your software vendor or your system integrator or technical implementer. So talk to us a little bit about setting up a PMO in that whole phase zero planning stage that's, so important to help overcome this challenge that Adrian mentions.
Well, I mean, the planning is everything. It's you have to have a successful plan. You have to have a successful approach, and there's certainly best practice in that exercise, and you want to be lined up to that best practice, but you almost have to even plan for those variable elements that are happening. So the structure of your governance model for a given project is about as important as your plan itself. So that, like you mentioned, we were kind of talking a little bit earlier to kind of say that, oh, we're planning for a 12-month cycle. It's not going to hit exactly at 12 months. So even the idea that it's going to hit at 11 and a half, or it's going to hit at 13 and a half, like, how do you plan for the shifts that inevitably are going to come? Well, the way you do it is by having a tight governance model. That PMO structure there lines up with governance and how you kind of want to structure things. I think you want to have a certain quality element in that. Client management is important. You'll have vendor management. They'll always want to bring in their PM and want to drive the project certainly from theirs, but that is a build perspective. That is where their accountabilities lie. To your point, you're going to have your own, and so you want to think about project management not as a singular exercise. You want to think about it as a team. You want to think about it as a small group that's responsible for a very important initiative, and you want to think about who is that group, what does that team look like. Every role there matters, and the role that the vendor plays huge. But you can't be distracted by them in terms of, oh, you don't need this, you don't need this. That's not your call to tell us as an organization what we need. Your call is to build this thing and to make sure that you build it correctly, right? Your call isn't to tell us what the test scripts look like, as an example. Right? Like, no, we have to build the test scripts as a part of that. We have to manage the change. We have to manage how we want our data model to look post implementation, as well as during the implementation itself, as well as even trying to migrate it from our various systems, which legally, vast majority of vendors can't help you with. So it's an exercise, and I think that all hands should be on deck. And when I think of what a PMO is, I just think about that collection of hands and saying that this is the group that's going to move us towards success. And you want to think about who is in that management room, not the core team. You have your core team, your project team, and your strategic members, and your best and brightest. You have that core team, but when you think about that management circle, it's small. I have been, as an example, especially when my Big Four days, I have been in PMO groups where you have like 8 people, managing multi-million-dollar project, all project managers, not, not like one project manager and they're doing this, but you have this team of about 8 different project managers that you certainly have a lead there, but you still have like 8, a bunch of different folks that are trying to navigate this huge kind of project. And so you want to think about this as a team exercise, and not as an individual exercise to kind of manage that towards success.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And, it also gets into another nuance or another root cause of implementation delays. And that is when organizations defer too much to the software vendor. Like you were saying, like,
Mhm.
it's not up to the vendor to tell you how you're going to run your business. They can give you advice. They can tell you what they've seen work at other clients, or they can give you advice based on how the software works. But it's very misleading to think that you can just rely on the vendor to make these decisions for you. And ultimately it should be the other way around. You should be telling the vendor what you need and managing it more actively and more aggressively. But too often organizations have this sort of learned helplessness because they're not the experts in ERP, which is understandable. They don't do this for a living. They have a real day job they've got to do. Their day job and expertise is not managing projects like these. So you do need the outside experts, but you need to manage those experts, not the other way around. And I think that sense of empowerment and control and ownership of projects, that's a big part of what's missing.
Yeah.
And when you do that and you defer to the vendors, now all of a sudden they have there's no skin off their back if the project takes longer and costs more than expected. In fact, it helps them. So you've created this weird, perverse incentive to delay the project.
I remember the shifts, and I think we've talked about this in other podcasts, but how the industry has shifted over the years from programmatic to cloud, and now kind of getting into AI. ERP companies are extremely powerful organizations from a financial perspective, and that's across the tiers. I mean, they just have a ton of money, especially from a software as a service model where you have this sort of subscription based approach where they're getting this revenue on a monthly, quarterly basis or whatnot. So with that, they kind of come in with this approach of this is the way you need to operate, right? And to some degree, I understood it a little bit more when it was so standardized, right? When we moved from a programmatic world to a software as a service world, the standardization of it all made a little sense to them. It's like, well, they're kind of telling you, this is kind of how you need to function. All the companies on our platform function this way. We built it this way for you to do it. We're kind of billing in a lot of best practice, blah, 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 blah. And you companies are kind of following suit. But now as we move towards AI, we're kind of moving out of that standardization and back into a world almost closer to programmatic, where customizations are a little more important, where the way I want to do things matters more than the way that we functioned, or all the companies have to function in your standardization world, right? The world of ERP is getting a little lighter from a systems perspective, and less dependent from an organizational perspective when they're thinking about their model. And the world of, this is kind of the way we're going to operate, and this is the way so I say that to say it's even more important now that you start to drive how you want this story to go for you and for your organization. Is going to require that vision. It's going to require that strategy, and you're going to have to dictate to a lot of these ERP companies, this is where you're fitting in my model, not where I'm fitting in your model. Right? Because this is how our organization is going to function. And this is where our organization is getting a ton of strategic information from. Hopefully that's coming from an AI layer. But this is kind of the way we're using our systems tools. And you're just a part of that story. You're not the entire story.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think we're dancing around a question here that I want to pull up. This is from Darian on LinkedIn. Darian says, when you talk about delays and the domino effect, what are some of the most common causes you've seen trigger that first domino? And we talk a lot here at Third Stage about symptoms versus root causes. The symptom would be something like we over customize the software, therefore that's why the project got delayed. It could be, but that's really a symptom oftentimes of something deeper, which is you had poor project management or program governance in place, or perhaps you didn't have good change management in place and people were resisting the change when maybe they didn't need to. So that's why they customized the software. So what do you see as some of the biggest root causes or first dominoes to fall?
I think those are the biggest two.
Yeah.
I really think those are the biggest two. The change management aspect of this, I don't think can be understated. Resistance is a huge thing. I think that once you kind of get on these projects, it's the last thing that a traditional PM thinks about is what does our change management model look like? Or do we want to pay for OCM? You're already paying for OCM. The question is, are you planning for OCM? You know, do you understand what you're paying for in your model that has changed, right? Training falls in the OCM camp. To me, testing has, in my mind, changed and turned into an entirely OCM exercise. You can learn a lot about how you adopt just based on how you test. And so it goes back to, well, why would you allow a vendor to tell you how to test? You know, you should tell the vendor, this is how we're going to test. This is how we're going to sign off. It turns into an exercise of certainly exchange, knowledge, understanding, but it's also an opportunity for you to start to drive what your organization looks like. Well, how do you do that? This is where your change model comes in place, and it can't just be a matter of dates on a project plan. It has to sort of be a strategic initiative to where you have a plan for how your organization is going to absorb this software. That comes with resistance. Resistance is part of that. You have people that have anxiety, that have concerns and that sort of thing. So when you say, like, how does these things, like, that resistance doesn't form right when you get to a point where it's time for you to test or train. The resistance forms early with people saying, I'm not sure about this thing. I don't know if we'll be able to learn this. You have people that may not even like the software. You may have selected a software that they wanted a different software. So they're already a center of resistance, and you haven't even started on day one. So I don't think resistance can be undersold. It starts. How do you bring those aboard? How do you engage? How do you bring aboard those folks that have doubts? Like, that is all a part of what OCM is about, and it should be a part of your project plan, because you should be anticipating that you're going to encounter a certain level of resistance, or you're going to encounter resistance in your project. Like, you should know that that's going to happen and have a plan for how you're going to manage that.
Right. Yeah. It makes total sense. And I think a lot of what we're getting to here is planning, ownership, managing change, and just understanding dependencies and what goes into these projects. These projects are typically a lot more complicated than most organizations realize. So those are really good points. Here's a comment from Kamal on LinkedIn. Kamal says, I just joined. Great to hear leveraging AI to accelerate and improve data cleansing, consistency, and completeness of the master data. AI can do 150,000 material master and 50,000 bills of material lines in a couple of seconds.
They really can.
Yeah.
And you know, that used to be manual effort.
Yeah. And the big four, you and I both come from the big four, and the model there was, let's offshore that to some lower cost resources in India or wherever it is. Now you don't even need to do that. You can just use AI to speed the things up, and you're probably going to get a better product a lot faster and a lot cheaper. The question I have, I don't have a good answer for this. I don't necessarily expect that you would, Khalid, but I'd be curious to hear your opinion or your educated guess on this if you don't have a strong knowledge about it. But I'm wondering if the big four the big consultancies especially, they make so much of their money on this low cost, low value type of activity. You know, those are high margin things for them to have these people in India cleaning up data, or having the junior consultants documenting requirements and training scripts and all this stuff. Now AI has taken that need away. Do you think the big consulting firms are adjusting their pricing model accordingly? In other words, are they charging their customers less now, or do you think what do you think they're going to do? Because it's going to disrupt their whole business model now. So I'm just curious what you think will happen.
Well, I think if Accenture is any indicator of it, they just laid off a substantial number of resources.
Okay.
Yeah, they laid off thousands of resources. I don't know if it was 20,000 or so, but they certainly reduced their labor force worldwide by a few percentage points. I want to say like 3% or something crazy like that. But anyways, a lot of employees were laid off. And I think it's directly to exactly what you're saying and the role of AI and the way that they're planning on becoming more efficient at this. They're planning on using AI in some of these more labor intense kind of areas. In the older model of let's just throw a ton of people at the problem and continue to charge folks just doesn't really work. You want to be as efficient as you can be. So that will be my guess. And I mean, obviously, I don't work at Accenture anymore, but I do know people that actually have been laid off as a part of this effort and exercise. But no, I don't have any firsthand knowledge that that's exactly what they're doing. But that would be my guess, if you will, on how they plan on dealing with some of this.
Yeah, and actually, as I asked you that, I was pulling up here. If you notice me looking away, I was listening to you, but I was pulling up one of our team members during the holiday weekend. It was a holiday here in the U.S. last week, and I didn't see this. I saw the headline, but I didn't read the article until just now. But it's an article that sort of answers the question I brought up, which I didn't think of until you started answering it. But it said it's an article that says PwC clients ask for an AI discount, and Big Four firms are losing hundreds of partners. But it says here in the article, this is just really interesting, that it says that PwC is saying that clients want to break on prices since the firm is bragging about making big technological leaps in efficiency, according to Bloomberg. And it says PwC has cut prices for some services as clients raise the fact that the consultancy is using AI to complete its work faster. And then the quote from one of the chief AI officer at PwC is, clients would hear us talking about using AI and say, we want our fair share of those efficiencies. We certainly, as appropriate, give our clients the pricing benefit of the efficiencies that we're achieving. But he said the article says he was a bit evasive in the interview. Priest declined to provide further details on PwC's pricing, saying that the firm's broad approach is to align AI-driven gains with client benefit, whether that's in efficiency, timeliness, quality, or cost. It's a very Big Four consultant type of answer there. He estimated, however, that tech consulting firms have improved the efficiency of the systems integration business by roughly 30% with AI. So his number is 30% you could save in the system integration cost, but it sounds like the issue is they're not necessarily passing that cost savings down to clients, which that's a whole nother ethics question.
And that 30% is specific to them. So think about that on the development side, right? You can totally see it on the development side in terms of how quickly they're putting together even some of this code, right? Like you can push that along the curve, right? And get into, we've already talked about data and the efficiency kind of there. I mean, obviously AI isn't necessarily going anywhere, but along every point of the software development lifecycle, there are efficiency gains there. There are cost savings, time savings, even value gains, as we talked about with core strategic parts of why you decided to do this in the first place, right? There's just so many different ways to kind of deal with this. And, even the Big Four, whether they want to deal with it or not, they're kind of forced to. And they're being impacted in a ton of ways. Contracts cut, what you're kind of sharing, laying off workforce, these are all elements of having to deal with a marketplace that's adjusting to sort of this new advanced kind of functionality that saves some time and effort.
Yeah, and for a lot of companies, when they bring in these system integrators or these outside, especially the bigger consulting firms, a lot of times there's no questions asked. Like, why do we have 30 people on this project full time? Do we need all 30 of these people? What if we only had 25? Would that be the end of the world? What would that look like? No one really asks those questions. And it's almost like it reminds me of the Wizard of Oz. They don't look behind the curtain. Like, don't look and see how this is actually done. Just don't ask questions, and we will be best friends if you just don't ask questions of why we have 30 people on this project. But it's amazing to me how many executives say, okay, well, you're the experts if you think 30 people are required. Whereas now I mean, if I were a CIO or a CFO, I'd be saying, we don't need 30 people,
No,
partially because you've staffed this up as though it's going to be a compressed project. We know it's going to take longer than that. So let's lower the run rate and the burn rate, staff it at a lower, lower level, because we're going to deliberately go at a slower pace than what the vendor wants us to. And secondly, we know we can save a lot of time and money with AI, and we use it like at third stage. We use AI as a way to undercut our competitors. Now we're looking at ways like, how can we price ourselves in a way that we're adding huge amounts of value, but at a lower cost compared to our competitors. So I think that if you're a buyer of technology and related services, you really have to be asking those tough questions of why.
And it's tough for them to ask those questions because they don't really know the mechanisms or kind of how a lot of this stuff functions. But 30 is a lot. And
Yeah.
I've been on projects I've had a project team of like 50 people, or if it felt like around 50, maybe the full team was it's a long time ago. So, but yeah, I've had big project teams like that. When you think about offshore and then the onshore parts of this, it probably was more like 30, and our full project team was probably more like, it was plus 60. I mean, there was just a lot of people on this given project. And one of the biggest challenges with that is just bringing all of that together. So I do something in a little bubble, somebody else does something a little bubble. And it's kind of hard to kind of get to a place where we're all kind of pulling in the same direction, or, especially from a code perspective. I write one way, so you write another way. It's kind of like pulling together a document, and each one writes a different chapter. It's like, well, but it still needs the same voice. It still needs the same this or that. So it's a challenge to kind of have to manage that many people. And so now you get into efficiency. You don't even want that many people, to make a long story short. You kind of want it to kind of get a little tighter, a little bit more efficient that way. And the smarter your team, smarter your team is, I think the better you'll have. Your integration will be better. You think your overall project will sort of be better. And so you want to limit those numbers as much as you can.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes sense. And the last thing you need is a consulting partner just to add to the complexity and the chaos of these sorts of projects. And unfortunately, that's oftentimes what happens. Um, I want to get to an area we haven't really touched on, but we've sort of alluded to it maybe in passing, and that's this concept of internal staffing and resource allocation of your own resources. So, one early dynamic that gets companies into trouble is that they get all excited and enamored for a certain technology. Let's just say it's SAP or Oracle or whatever it is. Doesn't matter. It's a big vendor. They've chosen this new software, and the vendor puts pressure on them, like, hey, sign this contract. You get a big deal. We'll get our staff out there, and starting next week, we'll start designing and building. We've got this 18-month plan. The time's a ticking. Let's go. And so the technology consultants oftentimes will show up, and you're not ready. You haven't even figured out, what your team's going to look like. You haven't moved them off of their day jobs to free up some time. So tell us a little bit about internal staffing and how that affects these projects in terms of getting stuff done on time, and also just the overall ownership and control of the project. How do you see internal staffing fitting into all this?
Well, for different companies, staffing means a little different. When you get into small and mid-sized businesses, they have to often wear different hats. And the one thing that I hear from organizations like that is we don't have a lot of time. And
Right.
so, from a staffing perspective, you're kind of already with those kind of organizations, it's already difficult because they almost don't want to be there because they have a bunch of other stuff to do to kind of keep the business driving in a particular direction. In larger organizations that do have a lot of resources, they can kind of have a little bit more dedicated staffing. But then sometimes the projects get really large because they just sort of throw a bunch of people at it, and kind of you have the problem that we just discussed. So resourcing here is very, very important. I think you want to start with best and brightest, and you want to make sure that you have the right designers of your organization, because that's what happens on these kind of projects is they start to design processes that you're going to live in for a long time. And if they design it the wrong way, your organization is going to find ways to fight against it, right? Whether that's workarounds or different ways that they can do what they need to do, despite the fact that they have this process in place that really doesn't give them the things that they want. So I think that the resourcing here, you want your best and brightest, you want collaborative folks, because you have to socialize a lot of information. Like I said, there's a lot of small meetings that are almost happening in back rooms on implementation projects, and that information has to come to light, and that information has to get across the organization so that everyone's kind of on the same page. And then you have to have the OCM element there just to make sure that people have an understanding and are able to adopt. So resourcing is very, very important. And I think those are the two elements that you want to think about the most. You want someone who's one of your best and brightest, but you also want someone who's collaborative and can serve as a change agent for your organization overall, so that you can kind of have those high adoption rates that you really need in order to really have a successful implementation post go live.
Right. Yeah, and it's okay to put off your technical vendors and wait until you're ready. Wait until you've got your team in place, because the more they take off without you, and get ahead of you, you've lost control of the project.
It's a Titanic. Implementations are a Titanic, and so it's very easy to point them in the right direction at when you start your journey, but when you're in the middle of it, it's hard to move them. And so that's why the governance model is important. That's why the plan is very important. You really want to understand your North Star and sort of move towards that direction, because the moment you figure out you're not moving towards that direction, it's just a chore to try to get it and play catch up. And even like with us and our consultative exercise, we want to be there in the very beginning, because if you can imagine, when you're not, you're trying to play catch up to multiple teams that are off and running, and that's always very difficult to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And Russell on LinkedIn is echoing what you were just saying, Khalid. Russell says the project team with clearly defined responsibilities must be in place before the kickoff of the meeting, or before the kickoff meeting. An external consultant will be a good idea too. So yeah, thank you for that, Russell. That's why clients hire us, is to help establish that PMO and help get the right internal staff in place and get the right governance.
One thing with that is, I think there's a certain amount of care and timing that should take into that. Roughly a month after you sign your paper and everyone's excited to do it, and there's kind of this rush. The implementer is getting their team together. They're finally, now they have sort of the license to sort of staff this the way that they're sort of looking to do, and they're trying to create a kickoff. And I typically don't like a lot of the kickoffs that I see, because I feel it's a missed opportunity to really come into this from a collaborative exercise and kind of say, here, these are all the people involved. This is kind of what the expectation is. I think from a change management perspective, you can do a great deal of good by having a really good kickoff, really, and making sure that the ambiguity there is less. And sometimes that takes a little more time, but I feel, this is just my own personal viewpoint here, I think you should take more time with your kickoff, more time on that planning exercise to make sure that all the teams are in place, and to make sure you're showing a unified front, rather than this is what I'm doing, I'm taking you in this direction or that direction. From a PM perspective, that PMO model that you were kind of saying there, where the whole team is kind of coming together and kind of saying that we're the group that's going to help lead you guys to where it's going to be. This is what your teams look like. These are the people that you'll want to look and get this particular information from. This is where we're going to need you in the project. This is where we're not going to necessarily need you. All that stuff can really resolve a ton of anxiety, rather than just kind of introducing yourself, saying, hi, I'm here now. We're really excited about doing this whole thing that's going to affect you and your jobs, blah, 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 blah. I just think it's a we're missing a lot of opportunities with kickoffs overall.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And a lot of what we're talking about here too is related to this whole phase 0 planning. What are the things you need to do up front?
Yeah.
If you're interested, I'm going to put a QR code right here on the top left-hand side of the screen. If you scan this QR code, you can get access to our phase 0 checklist. It's something you can get for free on our website. If you just scan that QR code, you can get that. It just gives you a checklist of all the things you should be thinking about before you get too far into your project in the early stages of planning, whether you're in the selection phase, you're evaluating technology and trying to select software, or maybe you've already selected the software and you're trying to figure out how to plan for the implementation. So I'll leave that up here for a second and let you scan that to get access to our phase 0 checklist. But another interesting comment here. I don't know if you know this, Khalid. I think you might know this. I'm a bit of a conspiracy theorist at times, and I apparently have a fellow conspiracy theorist on the discussion here today. This is from Russell on LinkedIn. Russell says, where they don't want an ERP is they may not be able to make money or commit fraud. This could also be a reason for resistance to change. So I think it's a funny comment. I think you might be serious, but either way, even whether you're kidding,
I hope not.
Yeah.
You know, I hope not. And I definitely think that if you don't have any ERP or your system's kind of in place, then it's definitely easier to kind of have those leaks in your overall operating model. So, you know, he really might be onto something there.
Yeah, but I think the message is, you know, you have to understand what the causes of resistance are. It's not really, are people going to resist change? They will resist change at some point. Could be because of fraud. It could be because just I don't want to let go of that spreadsheet that I developed myself.
I think the vast majority of folks are not necessarily bad actors. I think that resistance is natural.
Yeah.
I think that your first instinct to change is, I don't know. I just think when someone presents it to you and says, we're about to do something very different and you've never done this before, I think the first thing that pops into your mind is sort of to question it and to kind of say, are we sure that this is a good idea? Now, the more information you get on it, the more you start to maybe, start to get pulled into that direction. But that resistance is an element of any implementation. And I think it's more a matter of what are the ways to engage them? Like, how do we deal with it? How do we deal with the bad actors, that are really out to derail this implementation? How do we identify those guys? How do we work with that? How do we work with the people that are hesitant? How do we work with our older employees that just present a challenge to learning technology? How do we deal with the employees that aren't even here yet? The employees we want to gain. Maybe you want to do this because you want to find or you need to find resources in the marketplace that can support something that currently your current staff can't. So there's so many levels to how you're going to be managing this from a resistance perspective, to me, that it's just important that you have engagement and an understanding of what that looks like. There's a lot of great models out there, a lot of study in this from the business dynamic, whether we're talking about things like Cotter or we're kind of dealing with methods like ADKAR and different things. There's smart approaches to sort of dealing with resistance. And I believe that it's very, very important that you do so.
Yeah, I agree. Makes total sense. And a couple of comments here from Kamal on LinkedIn. What I often see is that companies embarking on large ERP programs like SAP have a different DNA. They excel at designing and building great products, not running complex IT implementations. SAP is a different beast, and most ERP systems are a different beast, but especially SAP. So that's great comments there.
They're a different dynamic, and I fully agree with that. But I honestly, and we've had this conversation, and obviously in my role, I'm on the AI side. I think AI is starting to bleed a lot into ERP. It's starting to bleed a lot into the dependence of companies and their ERPs, right? So as you think and have that conversation of those differentiating elements of kind of ERP systems and how they behave, I think the next conversation is how our behavior is changing. and how that relationship is working between what that behavioral changes in our organization from an AI perspective and the ERP element itself. Like I think that's just a core question. I think everyone is dealing with it. We just talked about how we're dealing with it in our own consultative sort of exercise or industry, and certainly our own practice. Everyone, within their organizations are dealing with it just the same. And so I think you have to balance that question, because after you balance that question, I think you're going to come to some harder realities, which is we're not really using our ERP system as much as I thought we were.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've got a closing question for you then, Khalid. What we've talked we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked a lot about different things, but if you were to give one piece of advice to a leadership team or a project team about to start a transformation, what would that be? Just in terms of wanting to mitigate risk, save time and money, not let this turn into a money pit, not let it turn into total disaster. How do you avoid that failure? What are the big tips you'd leave us with?
Well, you know me, and this is something we talk about all the time. You always start with strategy. My thought, though, goes to where are we in our cycle? If you're very early in this point, and I think you have a huge strategic window to sort of really game out what does our model now look like going forward. What do we need it to look like? What do we want it to sort of look like? And I think at that point, you really have the opportunity to create a business case for why certain elements make sense and certain elements don't. I would actually encourage organizations now, we certainly do this, but I would encourage organizations to really do a business case at the early points to really say, what does ERP look like for us? What does our model need to look like? How are we leveraging AI within our organization strategically? What does our data model kind of look like kind of going forward, to really figure out a long-term plan for how all of this works? That doesn't necessarily mean go rush out and buy a new ERP system, right? That could mean we can leverage what we have in our current state. We kind of need to make some tweaks around it. That could mean that could also mean that, depending on what your model is, we might need an upgrade, we might need to shift. Whatever the ultimate outcomes of that is, I think that you can do that in a safe way. It may be an upfront cost to kind of doing that, but in the long term, I think that you gain a lot, because you don't go running into one multi-million-dollar direction that later you come to find out is the wrong direction. And there's a lot of dynamics that are happening in the marketplace. So for me, early on, start your business case, get your strategy together, start your business case.
Right.
If you already know what your strategy is and you're in the implementation element there, I think then the plan there becomes important. And I think a really important plan starts with understanding your deficiencies. What do you know? What do you not know? Being honest with that. You want to get done the parts of this as much as you can, internally. I fully get that, and I fully support that. But you're not built to build ERP systems or business systems in general. You're sort of built to build widgets that you're really good at building. And so bringing in the right partners, whether it's the A team, bring in third-party groups like us in sort of strategic kind of ways, really getting that partner element down to say, do we have the right people in the room? Do we have the right PMO room? Really is almost like, we're getting into football season. I know you'll love this. We're getting into football season here coming up in a month. And you want to think about that quarterback room, right? That's that PMO room. Like, who is in that room? Who is driving the execution of our team? And if you don't have the right room, you're almost doomed to fail, right? If you don't set that up properly up front. So I think that starts with the partner conversation and understanding, what we have and who we need. And having that small team in place. And then from there, you can, I think, create the right plan and governance model for how you're going to move this towards a successful outcome. And that successful outcome should bleed into your post-live environment bleed into adoption and having high rates and being able to track back and say, we decided to do this for these 5 core reasons. And I'm looking at it in a post-live environment. I see all 5, and that's success. And if you can't do that, you're on a piece of failure. You're either on a big part of that, if it's a big failure, or if it's just, well, we spent all this money and we don't get any value out of it. I think that is failure as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's great advice, very sound advice. And for those that are listening in that want to attend our Stratosphere conference, we're actually going to talk a lot more about some of these best practices that Khalid and I are discussing here today. We're going to talk about how to make your digital transformations more successful. We're hosting it. It's a virtual event, or it's a hybrid event. So it's part virtual. It's in person, but we're also streaming it virtually. That's what I meant to say from the start. That was a mouthful. I made that a lot more complicated than I needed to, but it's in person in Denver, but you can also join virtually if you can't make it to Denver. It's at the end of August. I'll leave the QR code up on the screen. You can go to stratosphere2025.com to learn more about and see the speaker lineup, the agenda, all that stuff. So be sure to check that out. If you use the discount code EARLYBIRD, you'll get 20% off the registration fee, whether you join virtually or in person. So I'd love to see you there if you'd like to learn more stuff like this. And then also, all this stuff we're talking about here today, it's all stuff we do for our clients as far as helping them plan and prepare and execute on their digital transformations. We're a tech agnostic firm. We're independent. We're not affiliated with software vendors, but we've worked with all the major players, and we know how to make these projects successful, from having helped over 400 different organizations, different clients since we started the company in 2018. So be sure to reach out to us if you'd like to learn more about how Third Stage can help. But I want to thank you for being here today, Khalid, and thank you to the audience for being here too as well. These are great points and great questions that the audience had, and I appreciate you being here, Khalid.
Oh, thanks for having me.
All right. Well, we do these live discussions every Tuesday, same time, same place. So we'll be back next Tuesday on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter X, as well as Twitch. So be sure to join us, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time. This interview will get edited. We'll add some additional content. It becomes part of our weekly Transformation Ground Control podcast. Just go to transformationgroundcontrol.com if you'd like to watch past episodes of that show, and of course, see this episode once it's released. So thanks for being here, being part of the live production of this podcast. So thank you, everyone, for being here today. Hope you have a great week, and we will see you next week, and have a great week in the meantime.